Greetings, YouTube. So I found myself thinking about genes, which isn't shocking as I'm reading the book called Evolution, The Fact of Evolution, um, and how they could apply to your potential future post-apocalyptic event. Now, in the past, I have used transhuman virus as an instigator of a post-apocalyptic setting, and I freely admit I stole that idea from After the Bomb. The basic premise in After the Bomb, second edition, I don't remember how they did it in the first edition, was essentially that gene hackers got their hands on the ability to splice genes into other organisms. It released into the environment. All hell broke loose. So that's a rapid kind of a pandemic. So I was thinking of something a little slower. So we already use tailored viruses to splice genetic material into other things, creating chimeras, genetically modified animals and plants. And we actually can inject genes from plants to animals and back again. So jump forward X number of years, wherever you want to place the. I think that 2050 is a good number. Far enough in the future where some new technology will be existing, but not so far removed from our time that it is it can't really be relatable. And it's gotten to the point where you can do this kind of thing in a laboratory environment on a regular basis without any difficulty. So we have something go wrong. Now, the wrong could be deliberate or the wrong could be a legitimate accident. That's up to you. And essentially, the virus that can splice in genes at the behest of a researcher gets out. And not just gets out, it itself becomes communicable through bodily fluids. So sweat, semen, mucus, blood, vomit, you get the whole, I think. The whole collection of things that spread Ebola, for example. But it's not an initial pandemic because the tailored device, the chimera gene that we're talking about here, has been tailored to take the genetic material from one creature or plant and move it to another. So it infects a researcher, and the researcher takes it out into the environment, and he or she begins to spread it. Okay? Unbeknownst, or potentially deliberately, it's up to you. And the chimera gene doesn't function unless it's got two samples. And the first sample is from the researcher themselves. So the person's got this, transmits it to other people, but because it already has a human sample, as it's going from person to person to person and spreading itself, it isn't doing anything. It's in a passive state. Then someone passes it on to an animal. I'm going to stay in the animal kingdom, at least initially, but it could be plants as well. But animal, I think, is a little more, to me, I'm into anthropomorphic animals far more than I'm into anthropomorphic plants. Though, the 1992 edition of Gamma World that had plant player characters is awesome. So it gets to an animal, and when it gets to that animal, it now takes the human sample from the host that it is carrying and transfers that to the animal in question. Then it makes copies of itself, takes the sample from that animal, and then goes out into the world. Very likely transporting itself into another human. Because I figure the most likely scenario is this is being passed into either a pet or farm animal. Though it could have gone into something like an insect of some variety. So now that initial animal, that becomes patient zero. Because now the chimera gene has everything it needs to go to work. But this version of the chimera gene isn't going to make an immediate change. Instead of going after the phenotype of the animal, it's going after the gamete of the animal. So it's going after the sex cells of the animal. Now, if the animal is male, because sperm are being reproduced on a regular basis, that's going to make a change on us immediately. As soon as the next cycle of producing sperm, those sperm will now carry an active chimera gene. The next time that animal breeds, if it can breed, and then if it's a pet, this could spread quite far because the pet may be may have been sterilized. So initially, there is no reaction. No one knows that this is happening. And that animal could spread this even further before we begin to see this actively hit the world. Now, if it does breed, there's a 50% chance that the creature produced from this will be a chimera, a fusion of human and animal genes. If it is not a chimera, if it's 50% chance it's just a pure strain animal, it's still got the chimera gene in it. And if it's a female animal, that gene has now been spliced into the eggs that animal is born with at birth. Because you're a mammal, for example, a human woman is born with all the eggs she's ever going to have. They're not produced during her life. In the future, as this begins to spread, if two creatures, animals, with these genes, a male with it and a female, 100% chance it's going to be a chimera. But it's going to be potentially an interesting chimera. So how would I run this in play? Well, I would have, if you have two sets of this gene, and you have a 100% chance of there being something strange happening here, I would have there be a small percentage you get a pure strain. So a human could have a pure strain child, or a dog, for example. Literally, a normal dog is give birth to a normal dog. Or a dog could give birth in a litter to a normal dog, a normal human, and there could be like 2 or 3 other births in that litter, which could be some mix of human and dog. And I would have this dude, I would have every single animal in this setting have 6 traits. And 6 is there's a reason I picked 6. So like a human could have the size of medium, if you're going to use D&D terms. Could have intelligence, tool using, bipedal, and social maybe? I don't know. You come up with six traits, and those are the human traits. So the pure strain human in that litter I'm discussing of five creatures, I can't really call them puppies because this is weird, would have all 6 human traits, and that puppy that came out perfectly normal would have all 6 dog traits, canine traits. But the ones in between would have a chance of having a 50-50 split, so you get 3 of each, or get 2 of one and 4 of the other, or 4 of one and 2 of the other in the other direction. So you could have a dog that had only 2 human characteristics, or a human that had 4 dog characteristics, or a creature that had 3 of each. Now you could roll this randomly for those that love charts, or you could allow a player character, rather you allow the player to choose which their character has. In this world, random things may just be the way to go. So you could end up with dogs that have human intelligence and speech. Yeah, so like number 6, knock off social, give it speech. So it could have speech and human intelligence, but look like a perfectly normal dog. Or a human that doesn't have speech, that doesn't have intelligence. So it's got the intelligence of a dog, but it looks like a perfectly normal human. Now, this is not an original concept. Some of this I'm stealing from After the Bomb, because they had the whole bio-E, buying characteristics to create the mutant animal that you want. But I'm kind of paring it down to 6 traits each. This is also borrowing from the 1992 edition of Game World, where they had animals had specific traits, but most of them had fewer than 6, so I'm kind of bumping it up to 6. So I'm using it 6 because that's a number that's easily broken into those 3 different categories of 2-4, 4-2, or 3-3. Because this takes so long, you may not see this really begin to hit the world until the 2nd generation. It could have spread really far. So what happens when it finally hits? When people begin to have births that aren't purely human. When animals begin to have births that aren't purely their straight animal type. So with other traits. Now, there's no reason that you couldn't also have creatures that have cat and dog mixes, or birds and fish mixes. You can see how this is getting very strange very quickly, and many of them are going to become non-viable, obviously. If a fish is born without the ability to breathe water, dead fish. But so you have something, what I don't even know if you would call this a transhuman setting. Would you call this a post-human setting? And within like 4 generations, you'd have to do an entire gene sequence of an individual to be able to figure out what their genetic history was. Because you're not going to have a clue what it was. Because they're not necessarily going to look like anything. And because creatures tend to breed with that look similar to themselves, you may end up with speciation going on, where you end up with specific strains of humans with certain characteristics or animal with certain characteristics, and then occasional throwbacks, atavistic throwbacks, as this thing occasionally throws in a pure strain. But the pure strains may become rarer and rarer, because I would have that be a small percentage to start with. And over time, that may become suppressed more and more. So those atavistic throwbacks may become rarer. But there's no saying, for example, that in the 6th or 7th or 12th generation, that some bear sow in the wilderness doesn't have birth to someone that has 4 human traits. So they can look very much like a bear and have 2 of the other traits that the bear possesses. Or maybe it's even a pure strain, the whole wild, feral child thing going on. Now, I'm sure this is going to have a major impact. The military structures of the world that are still functioning when this hits may begin to see this as a terrorist attack. They may start launching nuclear, biological, or chemical weapons. Social disorders are going to be collapsing and then reforming. Some societies are going to handle this better than others. For example, the United States, I can't imagine since we have the majority, it was like 72 to 78% of us are Christian in America. Lots of Christians may see this as some kind of demonic infestation or something. So there may be a whole slew of backlash. It could be as benign as segregation. It could be sterilization. It could be extermination, responding to these births that aren't normal. They're all animals, folks. So whether they are normal or not, who knows? Depends on how you want to look at it. I can see a lot of tests going in. If something doesn't have a human level of intelligence, then it isn't considered a citizen. Maybe people are compassionate, and even if their offspring don't have human level intelligence, they still can take care of them, as considering them to be some level of disability or handicap, and they just become a member of the family that isn't as smart as the others. So yes, I am playing off a whole lot of social tropes here. I'm making this so that the other could be your sibling. The other could have no bearing on what you look like at all, and yet still be your sibling, your parent, your spouse. Multiple births probably become more common in many of these species, because many species have multiple births. Some don't. Maybe the number of multiple births will go down. So instead of large litters, you have smaller litters. Instead of humans just having one child, a lot of them may end up with 2 or 3, so slightly larger birth cycles. But again, some of these may be non-viable. You may just throw a percentage in there, the thing, whatever it gets of the Chimera gene, it's just not conducive to survival. I once heard that in response to someone that gets the double dwarf gene among humans. A doctor said someone that gets the double dwarf gene, that is not conducive to survival. So this may be a case where you get too much of the Chimera gene that the offspring is just not viable. So this is just an idea I whipped up at work last night off the top of my head while reading this book, so I haven't really thought about it too deep, though the kernel of this idea has been kicking around inside my skull for a while now. It wasn't until I began to really read about evolution and some of the characteristics of horizontal gene transfer, which I wasn't aware of, that I really began to see this. So instead of vertical, like parent to child, horizontal along the lines, for example, 18% of E. coli's genetic structure is from Salmonella. So there's some lateral horizontal gene transfer in that level. So what happens if that becomes common amongst the higher life forms? So I've blathered on long enough on this one. So tell me, what would you do with the Chimera gene?